From toothpaste to soaps, from cars to bikes, the tax rate on more than 500 items and services will be tweaked from the 22nd of September. Now, these sweeping changes are the biggest in the 8-year history of the goods and services tax. The GST Council meetings so far had only seen changes in about 20 or 30 items on an average. The idea here is to give a boost to consumption and is timed ahead of the festive season. Now, the government is also hoping for buoyancy in demand to offset at least some of the estimated impact of 48,000 crore rupees to its revenues on account of these cuts. These measures also come at a time when the Indian exporter is facing a debilitating 50% tariff on shipments to the US. While these cuts are not linked to the tariff developments, the hope is that these will strengthen the domestic economy further. Now, these cuts also come as India's household savings have been under pressure with debt rising since the pandemic. So, will this move put enough money in the hands of the Indian consumer? This is the Editors' Roundtable, and we have a full house here to discuss the GST cuts and its potential impact on people, companies and the economy at large. So, let's go straight to it. It's been 8 years in the making. One can argue about whether this should have happened earlier, but, the point is the cuts have come, and no one can argue with the fact that we are now in an era of a simplified goods and services tax. Two rates, essentially 5 and 18 and 40%, which is where you have select items, sin goods and luxury items coming in. So it also does away with a lot of the classification issues that we faced in the previous regime, a lot of litigation on account of that. So it is simpler, it is easier, and the hope is that it will drive consumption. Let's break it up into sectors now, and let's go to the big one. Because remember, in the previous regime, 28%, which was meant to be the slab that housed sin goods and luxury goods, was expanded to include all kinds of things. I mean, cement made its way into the 28% bracket. Cars, bikes, everything was in the 28% bracket. So that move from 28% down to 18% for a whole host of these goods is going to make a significant difference. And Parikshit, for the auto sector specifically, I mean, for companies like Maruti, Mr. Bhargav has been crying himself hoarse, saying that this is the need of the hour. This kind of revives, or hopefully will revive, the small car segment, won't it?
Absolutely. And you rightly said, Shireen, when it comes to GST, the auto sector is one of the biggest contributors. 16% of overall GST revenues for the government comes from the automobile sector. And yes, the small car segment had been ailing for the last many years, especially since COVID-19. And now what we're seeing is R.C. Bhargav saying that the small car industry may actually see a growth of 5 to 8%. And one statement that he made will stay with me. And he said that, yes, the market may be shifting to SUVs, but small cars are here to stay with this kind of GST reduction. And he is expecting a 10% growth in festive sales. So that was an important one. Even for two-wheelers, the entry-level two-wheeler had been ailing for many, many months now. Rajiv Bajaj said that two-wheelers never really recovered from COVID-19, but they are now likely to see all-time highs and maybe higher sales than the pre-COVID period as well. Almost the entire automobile segment, including components, comes now at the 18% bracket. When you speak about cars, 1200cc, 4000 millimeters for petrol and hybrid, and 1500 cc for diesel, and 4000 millimeters in length and hybrid and diesel. So everything comes under the 18% bracket, and all big and mid-sized SUVs, luxury cars in the 40% bracket.
And there's actually relief even there, because the fear was that there would be an additional levy to compensate for the fact that the cess was being done away with. But that's not the case. It is 40%. It's a flat rate of 40%, even as far as the luxury vehicles are concerned. So even there, they've actually managed to squeeze in some benefit.
Absolutely. So there is a 5 to 8% price reduction all across. You will see a 5 to 8% for two-wheelers, for commuter motorcycles, for entry-level cars, and even for luxury vehicles as well. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, all of them are going to come out with new prices. So if you speak about average prices, we're told that for cars, it could come down in the range of 30 to 60,000 rupees. For two-wheelers, it could come down from anywhere between 3,000 to 8,000 rupees. It's big. In the festive season, everybody wants discounts and price cuts of that kind. But at a larger level, Shireen, the government also making its policy intent very clear that they are going to be focusing on EVs as far as lower taxation is concerned. Everything else, including hybrids, will be either at 18% or 40%. So that also is a very important takeaway.
Yes, the government making its intent, as you pointed out, clear. It continues to bat for EVs, hybrids now in the 40% bracket. But Prashant, let's talk about what all of this now eventually means as far as the markets were concerned. And, you know, as we've been discussing, a lot of this had probably already been factored in, had been priced in for the markets because the Prime Minister made the announcements and then we did our bit. CNBC TV18 has been reporting down to the last item on what the rates would be, and that's exactly how it's panned out. But what does it now mean, Prashant, for earnings? You know, Ramdev was on talking about that big earnings bump up that he expects to kick in next year. What does it mean as far as valuations in the markets are concerned?
Shireen, you know, I'm only half joking when I say that Timsy got it. I mean, I'm serious. I mean, I think you also said Timsy got it down to the T. The only thing which was a surprise was that the announcement was supposed to come one day late. It came one day earlier, right? Apart from that, I mean, I think it was.
बच्चे की जान लोगे क्या? That is the government's decision.
No, I'm just saying.
They agreed so quickly. That was actually quite a shocker. You'd expect some disagreement.
So there was bipartisan support. But you know, Shireen. And we were talking about this yesterday as well, right? And there's been a lot of hand-wringing and general, not anxiety, but people wondering, why is there something we're missing? You know, is GST really going to do, or is there some fine print? Is the benefit not really there? And that largely was on the back of market selling off and kind of, you know, cooling off even today, right? But I think you got to take this in the context of the fact that from the 14th of August, which is one day before Prime Minister Modi's speech, when you know he said from the Red Fort that big bang GST reforms are coming, till you know day before yesterday's close, you know the three sectors. Pariksha talked about the auto sector, biggest beneficiary in that sense. The index was up 7%. The consumer sector 7%. FMCG, which is staples, etc., 4.5%. So there was a decent rally which had already taken place. So that is the very near term in terms of, I mean, to answer the question, and this is part of the, but this is an important part of the puzzle why the markets are not very enthused by it. I looked at numbers, I mean, and I think eventually, Shireen, it's going to come down to, as we always say, stocks are a function of earnings and earnings growth. Is there going to be a big earnings growth on the back of this GST cut? No, the basic thing is this, right? All companies we are speaking to are saying that volumes will go up. But we know for a fact that these GST cuts have to be passed through by different degrees. So the volume bump up will largely be, in a way, negated, you know, top down will be negated by the price pass through. So at a net level, what is the impact which companies will get to keep? That is essentially what the earnings delta is going to be. I looked at CRISIL, and this is just what their estimate is. CRISIL says that the GST boost to revenues, this is top line, revenues. And I spoke with the CRISIL analyst. I mean, it just came out. This is pretty large sample. 800 large companies is what they've looked at. This is 2/3 of the BSE, overall BSE market capitalization, these 800 companies. The GST boost to top line, which is revenues, is 0.25 to 0.5%. 25 to 50 basis points, that's it. Which means that total revenue growth for the year, FY26, is between 6 and 7%. You know, look at it another way. So this is revenue. I looked at earnings. Is there any earnings change? Again, I looked at as of the 14th of August and as of the 4th of September, which is yesterday's close. How have earnings moved? Maybe this is a little unfair because analysts don't pencil in earnings changes on announcements, right? They'll only make changes once the actual stuff comes, which is only 2 days old. So maybe it'll still happen. But so far, you know, the earnings change here, this is net earnings, net profits. CRISIL was revenues, this is profits. The earnings change in this 15-day period is 0.82% for Nifty 50 companies.
What's the
This
number?
is Bloomberg estimate.
1100, how much is it?
1105. It was 11,096 on the 14th of August.
If it goes back to 1100 plus, we would still go back to the number in April, March end, or earlier in the year.
Because there were some downgrades earlier.
Correct.
Now you're just coming back.
So
On earnings, just to add one more number, so I was looking at the Motilal note, which came after the GST announcements. So for the Nifty, I mean, after GST and everything, right now they're expecting 10% earnings growth. For their own set of stocks, their own universe, they're at 12%. Like Prashant is saying, that as companies start exhibiting tangible improvement in
12%
demand.
after the downgrade. So I'm saying that what I'm trying to say is
After
you are
Q1. So
essentially-
after Q1, there was some downgrades.
Correct.
Now,
So
obviously,
that
there is the
will get
GST
negated,
boost.
and now we can give, for the full year, we can still expect 11 to 12% earnings growth.
Yeah, that's where we
That's
are
the key
at.
message for most of the
And
analysts.
hopefully, if the festive season is really great and if we get a better than expected second quarter, if 12 starts moving to 13, 14, we know which direction the market is.
I guess what will help this is if we end up reporting 11-12% growth, markets will get stabilized and there will be inflows also back into India markets. What was lacking in the last 2-3 quarters was purely the earnings. We've been consistently seeing downgrades for the last 3 quarters. If this helps to at least hold the downgrades and we again go back to 11-12% of earnings growth, I guess money will come back to India. That's the key message from most of the analysts.
So the earnings growth
Yeah,
will come.
I think that's an important message. And eventually, as Prashant was also pointing out, the proof of the pudding will actually be in the eating. So we'll have to see what starts to happen on the ground, that festive kicker, how much of the consumption boost that is being anticipated actually delivers in terms of reality. And, going back, of course, to anecdotal conversations, I just had the Swiggy Instamart folks on the program, and their belief is very clear. In fact, the words used were that we expect this festive season to be higher in multiples in comparison to the previous year, and that was the indication that they're starting to get post-Rakhi, etc. So, one will have to wait to see, but I think that's the big bet, right? That the consumption boost will result in an earnings boost as well. But Surabhi, let's also link this to the macros as well. And of course, the markets are going to be looking at what's happening as far as the macros are concerned, both in terms of growth, in terms of fiscal space, and in terms of, what next now?
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's one message from the market that's loud and clear is the market is not worried about a fiscal slippage right now. In fact, most of the notes that have come in since the GST cuts were announced, they're very sanguine in nature. So let's go through the numbers. And the entire thesis is based on actual facts. What has happened? The effective GST weighted average rate has moved down dramatically. When GST was introduced in 2016, we were at about 14.5%. The next round of cuts happened in 2019 when that effective rate came down to about 11.6%. And now, give or take, it should be around 9.5% with the latest cuts, the 2025 cuts. But despite the fact that the effective rate has gone down, look at collections. They've been averaging about somewhere around the 2 lakh crore rupee mark on a monthly basis fairly consistently. And that's where the hope comes in from. So now let's talk about the revenue loss. Over a 12-month period, we know that the gross loss is going to be within the vicinity of about 94,000 crores. The net loss is 48,000 crores. So you look at only 6 months because the impact for FY26 is only 6 months. So the loss for 6 months, revenue loss is 24,000 crores. The center's part of that is under 7,000 crores. So it's not a very large slippage that we're talking about. Therefore, not much of the worry. Now, for the amount that is being foregone, what is the impact in terms of GDP, etc.? Prashant mentioned on earnings and on revenue growth. So if you look at some of the other estimates, the range between full year basis, when this really starts flowing through, going into FY27, it should be between 15 to 30 basis points of GDP. I have an estimate from Nuvama. They're saying the net stimulus full year FY27 will amount to about 0.4 to 0.5%, so roughly 0.5% of GDP, thanks to all the cuts finally flowing through. Not just this, it'll have a further impact on lowering inflation, which anyway is not a problem right now. SBI is saying that over the full year period next year, inflation could be lower by about 65 to 70 basis points. That's another positive. And if you put everything together, the income tax cut, the GST cut, as well as the monetary easing, then as per HSBC, the total stimulus to the economy is well over 0.5%. It should start coming through and to a large extent at least help perhaps mitigate or offset the US tariff impact, if not fully, but in a large way, because this is all
Actually,
domestic.
This is a more
boost.
conservative estimate. Elara Capital says 100 to 120 basis points.
Over the course of the next
4
FY27.
to 6 quarters,
So
go ahead, Nivesh.
Shirin, just to add to what Surabhi said, two data points from what you put out, from a market perspective. One about the inflation part, and most of the economists have now started penciling in at least 25 basis point rate cut further, and there is an outside chance of a 50 basis point rate cut as well. So that's one data point which will be important from a market point of view. The other data point was about the revenue loss, right? You said the center's losses are 7,000 crore.
For this fiscal,
For this fiscal. The bigger share will be with the states. And that is where, the capex companies, especially who are dependent on state capex and state money, that is where a bit of risk is now coming in, and people have started talking about it. That, will that be a bit of an hit for the companies which are very much dependent on state capex?
But before we talk about state capex, I want to go back to the point that Nimesh was making as far as rate cuts are concerned. If 25, 50 basis points, you never know. Donald Trump might want to appoint Sanjay Malhotra in place of Jerome Powell if we actually see 25, 50 basis points.
But after the last GDP number, Nimesh, which was red hot. I mean,
exactly.
That debate goes on. How much was the deflator and the technical aspect? But it was a decent GDP number. I think there's agreement on that. So not too sure if the RBI will be so charitable. They haven't hinted at it.
No, at least from what.
But it's not just the GDP. It's not just the GDP, because the expectation is, even RBI's own forecast for Q4 is a higher inflation. Yeah. And beyond that also it will look high because of the low base effect. This year's low base effect will show in next year's thing. Yeah. So the headroom...
but again, as what your data pointed out, if there is going to be a pull-off impact on inflation, people have started, at least some of the analysts have started writing about it, that maybe you'll see another rate cut.
The analysts writing about it preemptively only leads to disappointment. As the joke goes, the earnings are not below or above estimates, the analysts were wrong.
The sum and substance is that whether you're looking at GDP boost, whether you're looking at the GDP number itself that came for Q1, the current account deficit number that came a couple of days back, there is absolutely nothing disappointing, touch wood on the macros. As of now, the market is still in its own mode.
So,
but
the bigger disappointment is the market, despite good GDP, despite the GST cut.
Touch wood nahi bolne ka. The finance ministry mein people are working very hard.
They are. Market is like, abhi festive season aayega tab dekhenge.
Also the point, I think I just want to bolster, the data that Surbhi was presenting there. And let's go back to the GST Council meeting. Ahead of the GST Council meeting, you had 8 large states, ruled by the opposition, but 8 large states coming together saying that, look, we're in agreement with the need for rate rationalization, but there needs to be revenue protection as far as states are concerned. The fact that a 2-day meeting finally closed on its deliberations in one day and signed off on all the rates tells you that even states walked back feeling there was a sense of assurance that things are not going to be as bad as was anticipated, and that buoyancy that everyone's talking about, the government is talking about, will play out. Because otherwise, I think that it would have been a harder battle to fight within the GST Council, including, by the way, BJP ruled states, because at the end of the day, states are responsible for their own fiscal situation. So the fact that we got a decision, a unanimous decision, by the way, on day one, tells you that perhaps the assumption, the estimate on how much this is going to actually hit the fisc, and the assurance that states walked away with gives me confidence that that's probably why you saw this kind of bipartisan support coming in on day one itself.
And Shireen, maybe also acknowledgement on, because states also are seeing, right, there is a bit of a demand issue. So one, of course, there will not be too much slippage given the experience so far. And the fact that, maybe...
Slippage on the growth front.
No.
On the collections. Collections are still good. Tax rates have gone down.
Slippage on the revenue front.
But also acknowledgement on the other side that maybe this is needed. I mean, you need to, as Nimesh was pointing out, Surbhi said, macros are all in the pink of health.
Actually, I have some data on this.
Just 1 minute. Macros are absolutely in great shape. But over the last couple of years, if you see, people have been at the margin saying maybe we need to do a little bit of fiscal pump priming. But there has been pushback. There's been pushback. Now, we've had very steady macro data points for about 3, 4, 5 years, actually more than that, right? The fiscal deficit, etc., has been... So now you've got mainstream economists who come on.
If you take out the pandemic...
This is welcome. Even 2 years ago, this would not have been the case. This would not have been the reaction. Now, but that acknowledgement is there that all macros are great, and we need to focus on the micros, which is
a lot of people have been saying that for a while now, and I want to sort of tie it up to what Nimesh said, right? The idea is, if economy is a cycle or a two-wheeler, because we all like it, it's demand and supply are two wheels. You can't have one rotating and the other stopping, and I think that's been the problem with the policy approach. From 2014 till post-pandemic, we kept talking about supply-side reforms, supply-side reforms, supply-side reforms, and nobody still is investing because there is no demand. And this goes back to a couple of conversations before also I said the same thing. When there is demand, investment will come on automatically. So there was a need to keep both wheels rotating. And I think finally that has started.
Yeah.
Gone back to Keynes.
Yeah. No, but on that note, the situation is, the situation on the demand side is actually much worse than what the market, the market possibly knows, but it's not part of the conversations, right? In hush hush. So here's the data that I'm looking at, right? In the last 12 months, the moving average growth of personal loans, car sales, home loans, corporate wage growth, rural wage growth, except for rural wages, everything has declined significantly. Like 500 basis point decline in personal loans. Car sales.
The rate of growth is declined.
Correct. So 18%, the moving average, what was there 12 months ago, which is in July 2024, in the case of personal loans, it was 18%. Now it is 13%, right? The 12-month moving average has sharply slowed down, which essentially means that whatever savings that comes now into my pocket as a consumer, let's say a middle-class consumer, I am more likely to first settle my debt, then buy Diwali sweets.
We wish. That's personal finance, teachings 101.
No.
I'm not sure if people really do that.
See, the point is that if you're talking about Gen Z is getting the money from their parents, right? So, but other than that, people who still have to fend for themselves, they have to first prepay their debt so that they can borrow in the future.
Because they want to go to Europe. Take another travel loan.
But you have a
and then
point,
dekha
Surabhi,
jayega.
right? You have a point in that, because I'll tell you, after debt and dairy, let's say I'm dairy as a Diwali sweet something, right? Debt, Diwali basics, and then the next thing will be booking a vacation, right? That's probably going to be the order of expense.
The data comparison is, the early data is as of when?
July to July, 12-month moving average, what it was at the end of July 2024 versus what it is at the end of July 2025. It's DSP mutual fund data which they have.
The other thing is that on some of the points, right, and we've discussed this in the past, consumption has seen after COVID. There's also that COVID factor. For about 2-3 years after COVID, I think that repressed consumption.
Correct.
So
you're probably not going to see that kind of a bump. There will be no revenge travel.
Revenge buying.
But there might be slightly better buying than what it was.
एक बार को आपने बड़ा घर ले लिया, गाड़ी ले लिया.
हो गया, अभी
एक बार में बड़ा घर लेगा तो कुछ के लिए बचता नहीं है और.
No, but
I'm saying that this happened, that one cycle has completely
But
happened.
I have a question for Parikshit in all this. So now,
No, I want to close off that loop.
Yeah,
I'm saying
yeah.
so first because 42% of our household savings is household this thing is debt now, right? And it's a sharp increase from the last decade or so. So this is the household debt is a problem, and people will have to repay. Otherwise, there will be another sort of a cascading effect which we don't want. So people will pay, and some of that will come down. And then you will say, like I said, Diwali sweets, then travel and thereabouts. So what is left for discretionary is up to debate, and that is why I think market is not that excited right now. That's my reading of it.
my question to Parikshit and to Shireen as well, actually. So the market's mood swings. It's got everything that domestically you could ask for. Great macros, policy response, fiscal, monetary, everything. So the mood swing seems to be very clearly linked to one man called Donald Trump. So we go back to square one, right? And there, I don't know, I mean, what's next? Because...
I'll tell you, you spoke twice about good macros. The macros are looking good. Generally, markets and macros don't go together, right? I mean, it's always the other way around. When there is a bad macro, markets do well because markets look forward. This all good macro, good data is all priced in. So what I wanted to ask Shireen was, you pepped us very well on the GST, right? Through Timsy and everybody. Now what market is asking is, what next in the next 45 days? GST is done, mil gaya sabko rate cut. Ab kya denge? What will next government do? That is a big thing which I guess market is going to focus on.
And I think that is a very valid point, Nimesh. And again, I want to come back to a conversation that we had with Rajiv Memani, the president of CII, yesterday. And I think that there was a line there that was very instructive, that this is a sequence of steps that the government is taking. And this is one of the first few in that sequence of steps. Now, look, I think there is cognizance within the government at this point in time that we don't know what Donald Trump is going to do. Is he going to put more? Is he going to take it back? And we cannot lease out our life to the way that Donald Trump decides to tweet or not tweet, or the decisions that the US administration will take. So what is in our control is what we can do to strengthen our economy, our domestic economy, and also our engagement with the rest of the world. Look, a couple of things are happening. And if you saw the Commerce Minister yesterday speaking about the fact that we intend to expedite our talks with the with the EU on the FTA.
EU FTA,
We
yes.
intend to expedite talks with the Mercosur bloc, etc. So I think there is cognizance now that things need to move faster. What will that eventually result in? One will have to wait to see. But there is a sense of urgency at this point in time that one is picking up on. So next set of reforms, Memani yesterday talked about power sector as another possible area of reforms. It's a tough one. It's a complex one. But more deregulation across sectors, that's certainly something that a lot of people are talking about. Again, the ease of doing business. We saw that being linked to GST as well. We saw ease of compliance. So I think there will be more measures that the government will announce across different sectors, and Parikshit wanted to make a point on that as well.
Shireen, in the run-up to the 15th August speech of the Prime Minister, we had seen a major meeting of economists at the Prime Minister's residence, Lok Kalyan Marg in New Delhi. There, the chatter was, how do we work on the next generation reforms, including ease of living, ease of doing business, ease of starting, shutting, and having another business. So we are possibly going to see more reforms. Deliberations are on. And one thing which I picked up from various industry sources, Shireen, who've been in touch with the government as to how will this revenue loss to states be offset. The thinking was, and the sense that some of the industry folk who have been in consultation with the government have been given, that possibly in the union budget, there will be measures that will be announced that will somehow support the states and offset this revenue loss. So we're going to see more measures.
And we've seen measures, on the centre stepping in to support states. And of course, it has been conditional support. But nevertheless, we have seen measures in the last budget and in the budgets before that. So I think that you're right. We possibly may see some of that. So I think we will start to see, I would like to call it drip irrigation of measures and of steps. So something coming out every few weeks, perhaps. That's certainly the expectation at this point in time.
No, and we were talking about RBI, Shireen, right, about rate cuts and whether it's one and done or we'll see more. But the chatter generally amongst, if you talk to bankers, is that the RBI is still asking for suggestions. Tell us what you need.
Yeah, tell us what you need.
So, for example, one thing that I heard from someone is that risk weights on sectors like auto, etc. And why just auto? Maybe other sectors as well. They may bring down risk weights. So there is, apart from rate cuts, there is also this focus, very, very growth-focused RBI. That's what bankers say. This is not the this is a very
from a banking for that overall. The other thing which a lot of people have been talking about is how to attract a lot of FDI capital ex of US. Maybe you'll hear a lot of stuff from that angle as well, including the financial sector, where there are anyway been chatted about few large
Look, guys, we addressed it last week. We haven't addressed it. Look at that meeting with China, the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping. I mean, it's very clear. There is no sort of now pussyfooting around the fact that we want to engage economically with China. We want to do business. We want to look at more opportunities. Those were the words from the Commerce Minister yesterday. I would think that we're likely to see, more measures on that front, whether that press note 3 review, etc. I would imagine these are things that we should look out for.
Or maybe just stabilizing the relationship, that it doesn't burst whatever we need we get.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think
clearly
there are 2-3 things that I
FDI
want
X of US is what we need to track now going forward.
See, I think the big surprise is still going to come from what happens between India and US. And I'm here.
Yeah, for the market, I think that will be a big surprise.
That will be the trigger because right now people are bracing for the worst. Right? They're pretty much up to August, they were waiting. They thought something will work out.
And let's not take away from the fact that we, of course, want to ignore the rhetoric, and there's too much of it out there. But the market is still reading all the posts
and I'm saying
everybody in the US
I want to highlight a
administration.
couple of positive signs there. Right? One is yesterday's Piyush Goyal interview that we had on our channel, right? Rahul's interview, and I think the poise and the communication of, we are not going to get down in the mud with you was very clear, right? No matter what you say. Number two is, on the day, Shireen, that you mentioned, Xi Jinping's meeting with Prime Minister Modi, that morning, the US Embassy puts out a tweet, which is extremely different in its tone from what Trump and his sidekicks have been taking. It is very polite. It is an outreach that we've not seen from Washington, D.C. for a while. And that came with a quote from Marco Rubio, right? Which was again about defining India and US's relationship as a defining one for the next century, the same words that our people have been using here. And I think this poise and this patience will likely pay off, I mean, in an ideal situation. And if it does, if it works, before, let's say, because Goel said that if it's still possible before November.
So next meeting is November 4th.
So before that, there is a quad. Before that, there is a quad. Before that, there's going to be BRICS. So depending on what comes out of the BRICS, will set the
Quad will be contingent on Donald Trump.
Exactly. Will be contingent on whether Trump actually comes for the quad.
And there has to be a deal.
But I think something very positive that came out of the SCO meetings and those photo ops, as optics as it might be, is that maybe there is a realization, and Washington was watching every single bit of it. There was a rant of tweets from the US president on every post, every handshake, every smile, and perhaps that tells us that now Washington has realized that they're not pushing back just New Delhi alone. There is a bit of taking on China. There would be perhaps a need to take on Russia. If you really need to get real, then more sanctions, etc.
And you say take on,
can't just bully India alone. Maybe, I hope that's the message that's gone out.
I think my reading is slightly different, which is essentially, I think he will soften his stance in all three cases.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Because
that's
that day, again, his tweet in the evening after the meeting, etc., was a bit of the point is that he's back on the table to negotiate.
Exactly.
That was the vibe of his tweet that evening.
Yes.
So he's willing to talk.
Let's not run ahead of ourselves.
No.
As
all of this is projections.
A day is too long in the Trump administration era. But at this point in time, I think what is very clear is that India continues to try and engage. India is very mindful of wanting to engage. We are going to have to see whether the Trump administration takes up that offer and whether we start to see officials on both sides coming together and sitting across the table. But that is, of course, the big question at this point in time. But guys, we're out of time. But the GST is done. And as Nimesh was pointing out, the market is now asking what next. And as always, we promise you on CNBC TV 18 that we will tell you what's next, just as we did as with the GST. This is, of course, your GST destination, but this is also your destination for the most credible and insightful news break. So Prashant, Surbhi, Nimesh, Sriram, Parikshit, as always, great having you back on the Editor's Playbook. We'll see you all again. Take care, and thanks very much for watching.
Thank you.